Back to Siegfried Wagener Radio. Today it is July 19th, the year 2013, and we're reading a radio broadcast shortwave that was from February 20th, 1942. An analysis of propaganda by Siegfried Wagener. Good evening. This morning, as every morning, pandemonium broke loose in the MBS KFEL listening post when I tuned in the slant-eyed blackmailers of the shortwaves, the Japs. At the time of day, they regularly go in for a round of 15 minutes with our San Francisco transmitter KGEI, each broadcaster trying to shut down the other one. While the Japs trumpeted their latest attacks on Bali and the Burma Road, San Francisco told them to their far-off faces what civilized world thinks about them. In the midst of the Jap fanfare and the best pidgin English about destruction wrought on the Australian port Darwin, KGEI cut in clear and loud and with all fervor the speaker could muster, calling the Japs the most despised race on earth. If the war could be won by a good, pungent English alone, we would have victory in the bag right now. Unfortunately, it also has to be fought with guns, ships, and bombers. But propaganda plays its vital part nevertheless. In the broadcast from Japan this morning, the Japs tried to tell the world that Winston Churchill and the Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek were convening to put India under the overlordship of the Chinese leader. It is said that a federation of India and China was planned, and that henceforth 300 million East Indians would be ruled from Chongqing. So Britain, Russia, China. If you look at it today, Germany, England, Russia, and China are very, very, very close. And they're about to put America into submission by telling us it's a one world government. And from 1970 we owed $0, and now we owe $17 trillion and we can never pay it off. They've destroyed us economically. They're using our weapons and our men to enforce their will around the world so that we can have a one world government, a one world money, and a one world system. And when Albert Pike described the three world wars in the 1800s, the third world war is here. So as we study the Second World War and how it happened and what happened, think of how history repeats itself and the seeds that were planted during this war that are bringing upon the next war. Whether or not there was any truth in this report, it was just another Jap propaganda attempt to stir up trouble in India against the hard-pressed British Empire. It was aimed at fanning the fire of anti-British feelings in India, which constitute the most fertile field for Axis propaganda. Since the war started, I've been listening to similar blasts from India, Berlin, and Rome. They sounded far-fetched at that time because it did not at all seem likely that the war would ever spread to India. Unfortunately, the British government thought so too. It did nothing to counteract the infiltration of Axis propaganda into India. At least not by the way of the only effective means at hand, namely by making concessions to India's desire for dominion status and independence. From London, I heard numerous statements regarding the future status of India. But every one of these avoided carefully to promise any immediate solution to the people of India who insisted, and this was what you could always hear on the Axis shortwaves, that if they had to fight for the sake of Great Britain, they would do so only as a free and equal member of the British Commonwealth of Nations. This state of affairs became pressing for the first time when Indian troops were employed in Libya, but it was apparently not pressing enough for London to do anything about it. And so the people of India were left to be wide open target for Axis propaganda which promised them freedom and independence as soon as Hitler would have defeated Great Britain. Which we know did not happen. Today, India is under the immediate threat of Japanese attack, and nobody should be surprised if an enormous fifth column springs into action in India in the days to come. Reports from Malaya indicate that the fall of Singapore has to be credited to the tune of 35% to a fifth column which the Japs were able to create among the natives. So a fifth column would be traitors to the Aryans or the Nazis inside of countries. This is not to say that the natives of Malaya, Burma, and all India are willing victims of Axis propaganda. Most of them know quite well that the Axis victory would mean the end of everything for which they had hoped, prayed, and worked for centuries. But there are enough out-and-out disgruntled people among them to make military action by Great Britain and the United Nations a sieve with innumerable holes. There are apparently plenty of listeners who believe such downright lies and treacherous promises as the Jap radio said to the natives of the Dutch East Indies. I quote, "The Japanese forces will drive away the Dutch forces. We cannot stand for a single human race treated cruelly. You must contribute your share. You must help us. You must act quickly. We have every right to defend your country which has been handed to you by your forefathers, and you have every reason to fear the Dutch," unquote. While Berlin and Rome radio never dared to incite the race hatred of colored natives of Asia against the white man, because the Aryans of the North and the Aryans of the Mediterranean feared rightly that this would backfire on short order, the Jap radio is not at all bashful about it. The Japs as a colored people to colored people, and they paint the white race as the race of incarnate devils who hate nothing so much as anyone whose skin is a shade darker than their own, and whose sole aim in Asia and Africa has been in the past, and will be in the future, the complete subjection of all colored people. The Jap radio is apparently little concerned with this sort of talk made due to Hitler's plans of an Aryan master race. It is still less concerned about the fact that Japan's own conquest in Korea, Manchuria, and China made even the Spanish conquistadors in Mexico look like pikers. It works on the assumption that the native people of Asia have been treated so harshly by the whites for centuries that all else counts nothing. Unfortunately, what Kipling in a diluted moment called the white man's burden has played all the arguments into the hands of Jap propaganda. Having seen how the effective Hitler policy of dividing and ruling the various races, peoples, and nations of Europe has been, the Jap radio intimates it faithfully by branding all white people in Asia is the same satanic fashion as Hitler branded the Jewish people in Germany, in Europe. You see that? Having seen how effective Hitler's policy of dividing and ruling the various races, peoples, and nations of Europe has been, the Jap radio imitates it faithfully by branding all white people in Asia in the same satanic fashion as Hitler branded the Jewish people in Germany and Europe. There is little difference in the methods and contents of Jap propaganda when it reminds Asiatics of how the white masters used to beat them for not working hard enough or for not paying their debts, and Berlin radio over and over repeated the story of a Jewish loan shark in New York who, together with 6 helpmates, beat up a man who couldn't pay what he owed to him. While Jap radio does not directly call all white people Jews, it prepares the ground conscientiously for treating all white men, women, and children in Asia or elsewhere in the same brutal, horrible fashion as Hitler's hangman Heinrich treats the Jewish people of Central Europe. It gives an idea of what the Jap has in store to unleash on all white people at the proper moment when you listen to the foul outpourings of Hitler's shortwave propaganda to the Jap ears, as Jap ears are glued in order to learn the tricks of the Nazi trait. The other night, in the midst of the Nazi entertainment program, the man at the microphone in Berlin announced a talk about Shakespeare as one of the greatest men in history of the human race. Naturally, the listener would have expected, if he didn't know the tricks of the Nazi propaganda, that the talk would deal with the great English writer's literary achievements. It did at first. But after the needle slipped off the record a few times, the Nazi radio never tells you whether a talk is being given in person or by transcription. The devil's foot stuck out with a bang. Shakespeare, whose plays are admired in Germany from one end to the other, means nothing to Hitler and his gang except when they can use his writings to further their own sinister ends. They use his name as bait for literary-minded listeners, and as soon as they think they have the listener's undivided interest, they drown him with quotations from Shakespeare's immortal works, every one of which makes the listener believe that Shakespeare did nothing all his life but worked in Hitler's pay anti-Semitic pamphlets. So Hitler even used Shakespeare to be anti-Semitic. This is one of the most horrible misuses to which the name of Shakespeare has ever been subjected. The creator of Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, is made the unwitting tool of gangsters to exterminate an entire human race in order to facilitate their own sinister plot to subjugate all mankind. These gangsters claim to be pure-blooded Nordic Aryans. Well, I am what Hitler would call a pure-blooded Nordic Aryan of ancient North German peasant stock, but there was nowhere in my family anyone who used the greatest literary achievements of mankind to besmirch other people so the world would turn on them for our own shortcomings. Naturally, we were civilized people. But Jap propaganda technicians, neither civilized nor people, thrive on Hitler's tricks. As the Jap Army and Navy used the very Red Cross equipment which we sent to Tokyo to help the victims of the latest big earthquake to fight us. Jap propaganda technicians, neither civilized nor people, thrive on Hitler's tricks. As the Jap Army and Navy used the very Red Cross equipment which we sent to Tokyo to help the victims of the last big earthquake to fight us, as the Japs turned against us every piece of scrap, every piece of machinery, every patent which we let them have, so they will in time use against the entire white race every bit of self-criticism, every bit of self-searching writing which ever came from the pen of the great writers of the white people. As they have used our thousands of years of experience in science to murder our boys in Pearl Harbor, so they will use it again to destroy us if we give them half a chance. They will pull from our own drawers and bookshelves the arguments and alleged reasons to drive the colored natives of Asia into the white heat of hate against all men, women, and children of white stock, and to torture and kill them as the Nazis did with the Semitic people of Europe. Taught by the half-crazed Hitler, who was never able to see beyond his own nose, Jap propaganda in a fair way to explode that keg of dynamite, which is the hatred between the races. And that is my analysis of propaganda for the president. The shortwave stations which I listened and have referred to are Tokyo, JVW, San Francisco, KGEI, Berlin, DXJ, London, GSD, GSF, Rome, 2R06 and 4. Good night.